Hello, hello. This video is for anyone who is maybe new to the crisis line, just starting out and feeling a little bit overwhelmed, maybe a little lost in navigating our resources page. In an ideal world, obviously, you would have been able to log into Teams and start familiarizing yourself with our resources very early on in training so that you had like a couple of months to really get into it. But unfortunately, a lot of people drop throughout the training. Totally fine, totally understandable. But for our IT department, if they were to make logins for everyone at the beginning of training, a lot of that, all that hard work would go to waste. And they would create logins for people who don't end up actually volunteering. So, that's unfortunately the way the cookie crumbles, and I know that it does put you in a tough position, because by the time that you're actually able to get into Teams and to start looking through the resources yourself, you really only have a pretty short time to figure it out before you go on shift. So this video is intended to kind of, walk you through how to find the resources and hopefully explain a couple things and give you a couple of tips and tricks that will be helpful as well. I did want to just caveat really quickly before we dive in that we are not primarily a resource line, right? We say that in training a lot, and it's really important as we figure out the resources and as we learn how to navigate them, that we make sure that we're not over relying on resources, right? Actually, the primary function of our line is just to talk to people, right? That is our primary tool of de-escalation, is being in the dark place, empathizing with them, being genuinely curious about their situation, validating them, encouraging them, of course, doing a safety assessment and meeting them where they're at. Resources can be an incredibly important tool in terms of safety. We can absolutely use resources as part of a safety plan. However, we are not going to use resources on every single call, right? Sometimes new counselors, especially, are feeling a lot of anxiety about, like, I just feel like I need to help. I feel like I need to give them something concrete. And they start actually over relying on resources or feeling like they need to give a resource to every single caller. It seems helpful, but it can backfire. And it oftentimes does backfire, because callers might end up feeling like, I called 988 because I wanted to talk to someone. And 10 minutes into the call, they were I felt like they were passing me off. Like they just gave me another number, I don't know. That's not a good feeling. We definitely want to make sure that although we are, we want to be skilled in being able to provide and find in a timely manner resources that are appropriate for the call, that we're not using them on every single call. They're not our default. Actually, a lot of our calls, we're not even necessarily going to need resources. But of course, there's many cases where the person specifically wants a resource, right? The person tells us, I've been thinking about going to therapy for a long time, but I've never been before, and I really don't know how to find one. Yeah. Okay. Perfect opportunity to give a resource. A domestic violence situation, right? We do the safety assessment. We empathize with them. We're in the dark place. We create a safety plan, but ultimately we're not experts on domestic violence. And we feel like, you know what? I would love to share with you the domestic violence helpline, right? Because they are experts. So specific situations, or when the person specifically asks for a resource, can totally be appropriate, but we're not overusing them, and we're not using them on every single call. Okay, so with all of that said, now I am going to share my screen, and we're going to start in the Teams page. All right, so Teams page, hopefully we all have our DD Hirsch logins. We're all able to access the Teams app. This should be a review, right? So we're going to navigate over here to the left-hand sidebar. We have the Teams, the chat icon, I'm sorry, and then right below it is the Teams icon. We're going to click on that. You are added to the call shifts channel and to the resources channel. So we're going to go to General Resources, and then we see at the top here, Resources Home. Okay. I want to draw your attention to this blue bar here. It says this page is best viewed in the Chrome browser or on an external monitor. Copy and paste the following URL into the Chrome address bar. Okay, fantastic. So please, right now, if you have not already done this, copy. Now open up your SPC Google Chrome profile. All right. Now you're going to paste into your search bar or into your address bar. And here we go. Now this is the entire resources database, except that it's in our Chrome browser. Okay, why is this important? Well, and you can see I have it bookmarked right here. If you haven't already, please go ahead and bookmark this page and put it into your bookmarks tab here, or your bookmarks bar, I'm sorry, so that you have easy access to it. Actually, you can see that right now I am ready for shift because I have logged into iCarol. Okay, I've logged into Nice in Contact, and I have Max open. Okay. So we have Max, integrated soft phone, connect. Here we are. So now I have Max, iCarol, my resources page, and then my Teams app. All right, fantastic. So why do we want to use resources in our Chrome browser using the Sharepoint URL here? Well, for a couple of different reasons. First one, when are you going to be looking up resources on a call? I mean, when are you going to be looking up resources? When you're on a call, right? Okay. What else do you need while you're on a call? You need to have your chat with your supervisor who is listening in, right? Actually, you really, really, really need to have them both open at the same time. This is going to be a little bit hard to do if you are trying to flip back and forth between Teams channel, resources, you're trying to look for resources. At the same time, your supervisor is messaging you very specific, relevant information that you need to know while you are on the call, right? I'm going to give you an example. This is from a real call that I had last week. Okay, and this is my supervisor. And you can see she was giving me very specific things to say, right? What did they take specifically? How many specifically did he take? A lot. How many is a lot? Okay. How many in the bottle? You said you'd call 911. What's your address so we can double check on your safety? These are all really time-sensitive questions that I had to ask in the moment. So I need to be able to see my chat with my supervisor who's listening into my calls at all times during the call. Okay. If you also are trying to look for a resource at the same time, and you're trying to flip back and forth between the resources channel and the chat channel, that's going to be chaotic, right? And you really might miss something extremely important. So we don't want to do that. We want to make sure that we have the chat open at the exact same time that we have the resources page open. Okay. Now, if you have an external monitor, that would be great. If not, you could even do something like this where you have like a half and half situation. Okay, so let's go to general resources. All right, so general resources is where you're going to find 90% of the resources that you will use on the crisis line, right? Why? Because I think it's because you can see all these categories here, right? I'm sorry, I don't know how my window got a little bit not sized. Okay. You can see all these categories, right? So healthcare, homelessness, immigration, right? Crisis services, LGBTQIA, right? Warmlines, veterans, youth. So many different categories of resources under general. The other resources, there's a specific resources channel and page for our DDH resources, right? The disaster distress helpline resources, which I will show you in just a minute. But those specifically pertain to natural or man-made disasters that someone, a DDH caller, may have been affected by. For example, a wildfire or a mass shooting, right? Actually, you won't get a huge number of calls, DDH calls, related to a specific disaster, right? A specific disaster that we could then go to our DDH resources page and find specific information about. First, because the percentage of DDH calls that you get versus the percentage of 988 calls that you get is relatively smaller. And even within those DDH calls, actually a lot of DDH calls, because that number is given out pretty widely by multiple sources, some people don't know that the disaster distress helpline, they don't really know what it is. And so they're calling about just an emotional problem. They're not calling about a specific disaster. And so sometimes you even get a disaster distress helpline call where you will use general resources. Okay, so I hope that that makes sense. So most of the time for 988 and for a portion of your DDH calls, if you're going to use a resource, it will probably be in the general resources tab. Okay, so you can see here that actually, once we've clicked on general resources, every single resource that we have is on this same page, and you can scroll all the way down. And you might be saying, Julie, oh my God, how am I ever going to find something when there are so many? This is a completely overwhelming number of resources to have on one single page. Yes, that makes sense. However, that is where our handy dandy search function comes in. So you have navigated to the Sharepoint version of resources. You have bookmarked it. It is available in your bookmarks bar. You're on a call and you specifically need a resource for a homeless person who is maybe looking for a shelter. Okay. Now, instead of, you have a couple options, right? So you could scroll down here and then you see these categories. Okay. Homelessness. Okay. All right, got that. So that's one option. Or if you're like me, and sometimes you have a little bit of a hard time, like, I don't know, focusing on trying to read things on the page and scroll through things on the page at the same time that you are talking on the phone with someone, you have another option. If you have a Windows computer, you can click Control F. If you have a Mac computer like me, you can click Command F and then look. Oh my gosh, there's a search function. So now I've typed in homeless and I see that there's 21 hits. So I can scroll and it starts giving me every keyword, every time that homeless is specifically mentioned in one of our resources. Okay. so I can kind of scroll down and find what I'm looking for. Maybe instead of homeless, because this says like veterans services for homeless and at-risk veterans. Okay, mental health. So this is like safe and welcoming drop-in centers for those who are homeless. Okay, showers, but I don't know if this is a shelter. So maybe instead of the word homeless, I'm specifically looking for a shelter. So I'm going to use shelter. Okay, but this is a domestic violence shelter. Emergency shelter. Okay. All right, this is an education office. Maybe can I find a homeless shelter? Okay, so this is where you start to learn, right? That the way that this search function works, it's not the same as Google, right? If you type in, for example, homeless shelter, Los Angeles, into Google, Google is basically going to analyze your search keywords, and then it's going to figure out what did you mean, and then it's going to kind of give you smart responses, relevant responses that give you exactly what you're looking for. This is a little bit more rudimentary search function. So it will only give back the exact phrasing, the exact letters in the exact order that you typed in. Right? So if your keywords become a little bit too long or too complicated, too specific, does this mean that we don't have any homeless shelters in Los Angeles that we could potentially direct someone to? No. This means that these words don't appear in the exact order, right? So please keep that in mind. It's very possible that you're looking for a resource and we actually do have something, but you might need to change the keywords a little bit, maybe make them a little bit more broad, because again, this is a rudimentary search function, right? So for example, right, let's say that I'm looking for an LGBTQIA plus relevant resource and I type in LGBTQ IA plus. Okay. And I find five options, 5 hits. I see there's a category here. Okay. All right. So actually I only have 5 options. It's, that's good, but it doesn't seem like there's too many really. Well, maybe we need to broaden the search function to just LGBT, right? Because we know that many LGBTQIA plus serving resources don't have every single letter in their name, right? So we might be able to shorten our keyword to just LGBT, and then, oh, look, there's 51 instead of 5 options. Okay. So that's the search function, and it's super helpful. It's also much more difficult to search via keyword in the Teams app. So that's why it's so important that you use the SharePoint version and that you make a bookmark of it so that, when you're on a call, you can actually directly search. And that's going to be a lot more helpful than trying to scroll through all of these pages while you're on the call. Okay. A couple of things that I wanted to bring your attention to. First one is Warmlines. Okay, so Warmlines, there's a great summary right here. I highly recommend that you take a look and read it. This is something that we give out pretty often. So in our agency, primarily we are answering 988. 988 is specifically geared towards people who are in an emotional crisis or who are experiencing thoughts of suicide, right? Does that mean that if someone is just calling to talk about, that they had a bad day, that we will not talk to them? No, of course not. We will talk to them, but maybe only for 15 to 20 minutes, right? Because actually, we have so many callers We don't have enough counselors. We need to make sure that the lines are open for people who are truly in crisis, right? A suicidal or emotional crisis. Warmlines are a great resource because they are very similar to 988, right? They're helplines, except that they are not specifically made for people who are in a suicidal or emotional crisis. They're a lot more broad, right? So anyone, for any reason, just because they want to talk, maybe they're having a bad day, right? Maybe they're feeling a little bit stressed out, right? Maybe they, work has just been kind of tough recently, right? They just got into a fight with their partner. They're not in a crisis, right? They feel like kind of down and they feel kind of lonely and they just need to talk. They just need someone to talk to. They're not feeling suicidal. They haven't like escalated, but they just need to talk. This is where Warmlines come in. We refer to Warmlines all the time when you have very low risk people, right? They're not having any thoughts of suicide and they're not really in an emotional crisis, but they just called because they want to talk, which happens very often. At the end of the call, you can refer them to a Warmline and you can say something along the lines of, just to let you know, like, you did not do anything wrong by calling 988. I've really enjoyed our conversation and truly thank you so much for calling. But I did just want to let you know that 988 in general is more geared for suicidal or emotional crises. And it sounds like, you're not completely in a crisis situation. So I wanted to let you know about these other helplines that exist called Warmlines. And you can kind of give them the pitch like what I just explained to you. And then we have a lot of options. Okay. So this is a great one that we offer a lot. Okay, you can find a bunch of national Warmlines here on warmline.org. And then we have for California. Okay. Fantastic. Right. So Warmlines. We give Warmlines out a lot. Okay. Another one that I wanted to draw your attention to. Okay, so if we go back up to the top, scroll down a little bit. Okay. Remember I said that we are not primarily a resource line. Primarily what we do is just talk to the callers. But, maybe someone is calling an info-only call, and they really need a very specific resource. Even though our database is really large, a lot of our resources are geared more towards California and the LA area. Sometimes people are calling, they reach us, they reach Dee Dee Hirsch, because their area code routes them to Los Angeles, but they have moved, right? Now they're living in Florida. They used to live in LA, and so they still have an LA area code. They call 988, and they're reaching us, but the resources that they need, we don't have because we don't have many resources in other parts of the country, right? So in this case, we might want to refer them to 211. All right, so what is 211? You can find a really handy dandy little chart here that explains it. 211, just like 988, is a line that anyone around the country can call, and their area code will route them to their local center, okay? So these are resource specialists. This is a specific line made to connect people locally with their resources, okay? So what kind of resources? Food, shelter, housing, utilities, employment, education opportunities, veterans, healthcare information, addiction prevented, rehab programs, okay? Support groups for mental illness, okay? Lots of different, a very broad kind of swath of local resources that anyone can access by dialing 211. Okay. All right. So you might see here, okay, oh my gosh. Look at all of these different, okay. Look at all of these different numbers that we have. Okay, so we have all of these access lines, crisis lines. Okay, whoa, for every single county in California. Then for Alaska, okay, for Colorado, for Connecticut, Delaware, Florida. Okay. Oh my gosh, we have all of these different numbers, right? But you might be confused, like, okay, so for example, here we are at Florida, and we see 211 Heart of Florida United Way. Well, if the person locally can just call 211 and that's going to route them to their local 211 number, why would we need this this one, right? The direct line? Well, for the reason that I just gave you, right? So let's say that we get a 988 caller and they just moved to Florida from Los Angeles. So their area code has routed them to DD Hirsch. They need a specific resource. We could tell them about 211, but guess what? When they call 211, their area code would route them again to the 211 line in Los Angeles. And that's not helpful for them. So in this case, we can go into our resource database and we can find, okay, let's say that we find their county and we see that they're in Tampa. Great. Now we have the direct line to the Tampa Bay, to the Tampa City 211 line, and we can share that with them. Okay. So you might also be wondering, okay, what the hell is this? Is an access line? Okay, because, okay, I understand what 211 is. I understand why that's helpful, but what is an access line? Okay, well, again, we have this great chart. So access lines are a little bit different than 211. They're generally facilitated by local county governments, okay, at the local level, at the government level, sorry, or at the county level. And 211, they can give you resources that you can call yourself, okay? So it's possible that, you know, I'm looking for an inpatient facility, right, in my local area for substance abuse. And so 211, they are able to, I call 211, they're able to give me a list of different rehab inpatient facilities in my area, and I'm able to call them myself. They might be able to transfer me directly, but basically they will not be able to facilitate the intake process, right? An access line is actually operated within, generally is operated by a branch of the local county government. And so, for example, let's say that I am in crisis and I want to be admitted to an inpatient facility for rehab because I am potentially going to overdose on a certain type of drug that I'm addicted to. I could call an access line in my county and they could actually directly send out a mobile response team and they could do a crisis intervention intake for me, right? So they may, for example, be able to actually dispatch a mobile response team to me directly. They may be able to evaluate me psychologically and provide me directly, right, into an emergency service intervention. Okay. So for example, the PMRT, right, the psychiatric mobile response team, is only, you're only able to access it through calling the Los Angeles Department of Mental Health. Okay, so you call the LA Department of Mental Health, and then I believe that you are prompted and you press 2 for PMRT. Okay, so that LA Department of Mental Health number, that is an access line. Okay, so hopefully we understand the difference. 211 is like broad resources, right? Access lines is like operated at the county level, and they are able to more formally do crisis intervention, to do intakes, and to potentially dispatch a crisis team to you directly, right? They also have a list of all of the possible, lots of different, mental health and crisis services in their area. So for example, if I wanted an inpatient facility for substance use and I'm in Los Angeles County, I could call 211 with my LA area code and they could provide me a list, right, of rehab facilities that have inpatient services. Or I could call the LA Access Line, which is the LA Department of Mental Health, and they could also provide me with that same information, but they could also potentially take the next step in assisting me directly with my intake. Okay, so I hope that that makes sense, right? So mental health service referrals, screenings and evaluations, right? Acute crisis care and evaluation for system-wide services. Okay. So I hope that we understand what an access line is. So you can see here, for example, in LA County, we have the LA County Department of Mental Health. This is the access line. We also have the local 211 number for LA. Okay. In Orange County, it's called OC Links. Okay, so for anyone that we have who's calling from Orange County, we have this OC Links, that's the access line. The OC Links can actually directly dispatch a mobile response team, right? They can directly provide free transportation to someone who is a resident who is in OC, who is in Orange County, to an emergency service intervention facility. Okay, 211 would not be able to do that. Okay, so Warmlines, access lines versus 211. Another one that I really wanted to kind of draw your attention to, something that we use a lot, is when people are looking for a therapist. This is just one of my favorite ones. So psychologytoday.com. Oh, oops. Psychologytoday.com. Okay, so let's say someone is looking for a therapist. Okay, I often give this one. I'd say, psychologytoday.com is really great because you can go on their website and then you can click find a therapist. Then you can type in your zip code. Okay, so let's say, because I am located in around Asheville. All right. Now I can actually filter by a specific issue. So let's say my main issue is anxiety. I can filter by gender. Okay. So we can make it a little bit more broad. So just in Asheville. That's it. So anxiety, insurance, right? Gender, types of therapy, maybe EMDR. Great. Okay. So now I see someone who is in my area, who accepts my insurance, who specializes in the area that I need, and who does a very specific type of therapy. That's fantastic, right? Okay. So I think that's already a lot of information. I'm going to finish there. Hopefully this video has been helpful. Now you understand that you need to have the SharePoint URL up in addition to the Teams app. You're able to search directly within the SharePoint using the search function, either Command or Control F, and you are familiar with Warmlines, access lines versus 211, and a useful resource to find a therapist if that ever comes up. There's so many resources. I highly recommend, just familiarizing yourself, right? Just taking like 30 or 45 minutes and actually just scrolling through the different sections and reading the information bubbles at the top, right? For example, that access lines versus 211, that chart is always there and it's very helpful. So sometimes just taking 30, 45 minutes, scrolling through the resources, looking through the different types of resources we have. And then if you have questions, you can try to find the information in the little description section that we have above most of our types of resources, or you can also always ask a member of the training team or your shift supervisor. Okay, thank you so much. I know that this is a lot of information. Really appreciate your time, and I hope that this helps, and good luck.